Alright, we're going to go ahead and start U.S. History Part 2, but before we do, I want to point out a few things. So, my fiance is really into Pinterest right now because we're getting married and all, but I actually found Pinterest to be awesome for U.S. history. And so what I do is every time I find a U.S. history thing, I just start pinning it. And crack.com, I don't know if you guys read crack.com at all, is hilarious, and it has this amazing, well-researched history. And so I just started pinning stuff that's relevant for U.S. history. And so what I did, I've just taken a bunch of crack.com articles, and I just started putting them in my Pinterest here, so that eventually when I want to go and look at some unique stuff about World War II, like one of my favorite ones is, where is it? The 5 craziest war stories of all time that happened on the same ship. It's pretty amazing. So I'll have this, and then I'm going to start pinning stuff. I mean, tons of websites that I read, Gizmodo, IO9, whatever else, will just have random history stuff. I once found a original kinetoscope video of Thomas Edison riding through Brooklyn Bridge for the first time. That was one of the first test recordings of it. And I wouldn't have found that on my own. So I found that Pinterest to be pretty spectacular when it comes to that. So I would highly recommend. And if you're doing a lecture, let's say on Vietnam War, I mean, just type in Pinterest or Vietnam War, and someone has already done it because they're a hobbyist, and the photos there are going to be pretty good. So I highly recommend using Pinterest for other reasons besides just hobbies and crafts and weddings. It's actually pretty good for teaching. And this is a website you can then say, hey guys, by the way, I just found some cool stuff, so if you guys want to look at my Pinterest or just random things your kids can go through, it's kind of just a great way. And so yeah, the crack.com articles may not be as appropriate for students, but still, I mean, you don't have to teach it in class. It's like, here's what I'm reading, it's funny, feel free. Drunk history I would put on here, and then if my kids want to watch it, so be it. I'm not advocating, it's just something that I find in my personal time to be funny. But I really like this, and so I'm going to try to figure out Pinterest a little bit more as I move forward. But again, you can like it. I don't know how that works. I just did this today. But if you guys do want to just copy my pins later because you find it useful for your classes, then feel free to do that. I did also send you guys an email today, I don't know if you guys got it, about the, looks like this, that's my brothers, do you guys right here. It's just about the actual how to study. So what some people were explaining to me earlier was that they were just going to look for answers they were going to read the blueprints and then look for the answers. I don't recommend studying like that because that's not how you're going to take the test. You should actually read the books and then go and try to answer the questions or the objectives. And if you can't, then you go and search for the answers. But the other way around is not effective. The other way around is not read the question and find the answer. You're going to have to do some recall. So recall is something you're going to have to practice. All the files for world history so far are linked right here. So download Dropbox. You guys already have Dropbox?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you do, then just go and download the files. If you don't have Dropbox, go ahead and click on that link. You'll download it, and then you can click on the Dropbox link after to download the files. I'll do the same for U.S. history once we finish this, because I am changing the class a little bit based on resources that I found recently, and then I'll give you all those files thereafter. But again, my recommendation is you guys do follow the blueprint and you start using that to study, but make sure that you're reading either the copybook, textbook, or you're finding websites online to read U.S. history or world history, and then you go from there. If I can find a nice digital ebook for you guys for world history, I'll find it for you. I'll give it to you guys. But otherwise, right now, I've only been able to find U.S. Otherwise, today I'm going to go ahead and start off with, where are we? I'm going to start off with Reconstruction, since you guys seem to struggle the most with that today. Reconstruction. Reconstruction is the post-Civil War era, 1865 to 1877. Plot keeping is going on here. Again, I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff here just to kind of hit on the key things you guys do know. And again, based on the class, you guys know most of this. So I'll just go over just the key stuff here. The purpose of Reconstruction is to repair damage to the South, restore southern states to the Union, and address the issue of freed slaves. One thing you should note is that there was this idea permeating that maybe we shouldn't free the slaves. That, you know what, the whole point of the Civil War was to restore the Union, not to free the slaves. That was just a bonus if we did that. So even Abraham Lincoln made the famous quote, "If I could save the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save the Union by freeing some and others not, I would do it." So again, Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist by any means. He genuinely believed that the key purpose was to restore the Union. In fact, I don't remember if the question was on the test, but the Emancipation Proclamation, I'm sure you guys are familiar with, it freed the slaves. That's a story that everyone's told. But are you guys actually familiar with what it actually did? The Emancipation Proclamation only freed the slaves in the rebel South. But we had no control over the slaves in the rebel South. We had no control over it at all. And there were Union states that controlled slaves. But we didn't free those slaves. Because if we freed those slaves, they would have seceded as well. And so the reality is the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free any slaves. The phrase that we like to use is where he could, he would not, and where he would, he could not. He can't free the slaves in the border states. Those are Union states that have slaves, because if he frees those slaves, they're going to break away. He can't actually free the slaves in the South, even though that's what the Emancipation Proclamation did, because we have no power there. And so, how many slaves did Lincoln free with the Emancipation Proclamation? None. And yet, he goes down in history. I mean, he is an awesome president. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing him contextually. I think that he did what he thought was right at the time. But he didn't actually free any slaves at that time. So that is something to note. I also should note that when we say that Lincoln freed the slaves, also he didn't. It was Congress that passed the 13th Amendment that freed the slaves. The president had nothing to do with, he signed it, but Congress said, you don't have to sign it. It's not your role when passing amendments. You have nothing to do with that. And so that happened. Again, don't worry about the inaugural address, but question of Reconstruction. So Lincoln is assassinated. He was replaced by Andrew Johnson, who's kind of a D-bag. But Lincoln's Reconstruction. So Lincoln's Reconstruction plan was called the 10% plan. Okay? Lincoln's Reconstruction was called the 10% plan because he wanted immediate Reconstruction. All he said was if 10% of the people in the South, or in each state in the South, if they pledge a loyalty to the U.S., then you can come back home. You can rejoin the Union. So that was his plan. It was a 10% plan. If 10% of the population of a southern state pledged an oath to the Union, then you could come back. You didn't have to free the slaves. You didn't have to give the slaves the right to vote. You didn't have to say sorry for the war. Oh, by the way, if you were a Civil War general, or if you were a Confederate general or a Confederate senator, you could come back to your job. So if you were the Confederate Vice President, Stevens, he ends up actually going back to the U.S. Senate under Lincoln's Reconstruction plan. And the other Republicans said, wait a minute. He's the guy who helped secede it, and he gets his job back? What consequence was there for seceding? And so what ends up happening is that a lot of the Republicans, these radical Republicans, are really upset with what's happening. They feel that Lincoln is being too easy with the Confederates. Now, to be fair, Lincoln is kind of tired of the war. He doesn't want any more conflict. He just wants to forgive and forget. Look, everyone's sorry about the war. We all can say sorry and forgive and forget. Let's just move on. But the Republicans at the time did not want to do that. I should also note the Republican Party and Democrats are switched at this time. So Lincoln is a Republican, though he would not be a Republican today. And the Democrats, or the Southern Democrats, are the KKK party, they're the Deep South, and the parties have yet to become the modern parties that they are. So that's Lincoln's Reconstruction. Congress doesn't like that at all, until Congress instead passes the 13th Amendment, which frees all the slaves. So the 13th Amendment bans slavery. Hooray! They're all finally emancipated, because the Emancipation Proclamation didn't really do anything. Radical Republicans, they're the ones who promoted Reconstruction. The radical Republicans are the ones who promoted Reconstruction, and they're the ones that were not happy with just keeping things the way they were. They wanted, a lot of change. What they're called radical. They wanted a lot of change. They were unhappy with the South not being punished for the war. Again, these are just quotes. And so they tried to pass the Wade-Davis bill. The Wade-Davis bill was the beginnings of Congressional Reconstruction. And what they wanted was a 50% plan. Also, former Confederate leaders, they could not return to office. So again, there was a 50% plan, and former Confederate leaders could not return to office. They were more strict because they definitely wanted to punish the Southerners. Okay, skip that. The Southerners, on the other hand, weren't really following the codes or the rules. So they say, fine, we'll free the blacks, but we're going to institute black codes. Because they're not educated, you know what? They don't understand their freedoms yet. So the Southern states are going to institute the black codes. Because sure, the blacks are free, but we got to regulate them. So they passed the black codes where things like blacks may not own weapons. Blacks may not be out at night. Blacks may not work. Blacks are required to work. And if you're not working, if I'm a white person, I can walk down the street, and if you're unemployed, I can make you work on my farm. Because you're unemployed, and we don't like that. You can't intermarry. So pretty much the argument is that the black codes were very much like the slave codes. They were just restoring slavery. But the South said, oh no, it's not slavery. They're black codes. They're not slave codes. They're different. Because the name is different. But they're pretty much the slave codes. Now, many blacks were forced into sharecropping or tenant farming because there weren't very many options. So these slaves are free now. They're freemen. Okay, they're freedmen. And so they had to find work. So many of the former plantation owners that lost their farms or they lost all their work, they said, look, here's what we'll do. You don't have a job, I don't have workers, so how about this? Why don't you, my former slaves, work on my plantation? And what we're going to do is we'll tenant farm, we'll sharecrop. I will give you a small plot of land. I'll let you rent it from me. And at the very end of the year, you give me 50% of your crop. That'll pay for the rent, that'll pay for the food I'll give you until the crop is done. How does that sound? And slaves are like, for freedmen are like, sure, let's do that. White people also did this. So poor whites also did sharecropping. At the very end of the year, they said, well, okay, well, the year is up. I get 50% of that. So, oh, here's your 50%. But you do also owe me for the food that you borrowed, and you owe me for the supplies and the seeds. So how about this? Pay me 50% now, and you can owe me 10% next year. And the following year you owe 60, following year you owe 65, following year you owe 67, and so it becomes harder and harder, and so sharecropping and tenant farming became virtual slavery. Well, it's not slavery, it's tenant farming. If they can leave whenever they want, provided they pay off their debts. But of course, we're never going to pay off their debts because we forced them into the sharecropping or tenant farming system. So it's virtual slavery for the most part. And again, so here's the fun quiz. Which of these is slavery and which of these is sharecropping based on the photos? The one on the left is slavery and the one on the right is sharecropping. But it's pretty hard to tell because they look almost exactly the same. And so that's the argument, is that, well, what really changed? And really many people in the North thought, well, if you go to the South, I don't really understand what's different. It looks exactly the same like what we had fought to get rid of. But it is different. No, it's not. Don't worry about this stuff so much. Vicious cycle of debt. This pretty much is kind of how it works out. People just get poor all the time. Percent of sharecroppers, it's a good majority of the South is sharecropping, and so most blacks return to some form of virtual slavery. So what do we fight for? So, people ask me, wait, so who exactly won the Civil War? I thought that the North won, but the blacks have no rights. They are back to farming. There are former Confederates back in power. Was there a war at all? I remember that we lost 500,000 people. I remember that. But what were the gains? And so people were kind of upset. They asked, what has happened here? And so Congress begins radical Reconstruction. Radical Reconstruction begins because Congress is upset that there hasn't been enough progress in the South. They feel that if we don't do this, then those people in the Civil War died for nothing. I mean, people make the same arguments for Afghanistan today. You know, if we make no progress, then why did those 3,000 people die? I mean, really, what was the point? Same for everywhere. Vietnam, Korea, same argument. What was the point if we don't win this war? Or if nothing changes? And so we do begin a few institutions. The first is the Freedmen's Bureau, which you guys were able to get correctly. The Freedmen's Bureau's job was first and foremost to assist freedmen with jobs, housing, the vote, not the vote yet, but jobs, housing, but most importantly, education. The Freedmen's Bureau's biggest success was education, and they educated both whites and blacks. They're credited for increasing the literacy rate in the South from like 24% to 90%. So yeah, while the North is already like 88% literacy, the South is still around 24. I mean, that's including slaves who were not educated. But by the time the Freedmen's Bureau kind of, lapses, 90% literacy rate. So they are able to pick it up pretty quickly because they're educating both whites and blacks. So plus there. Here they are again, educating blacks. Here's middle school. So Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act is then also passed by Congress to guarantee blacks civil rights. We believe that they should have civil rights, right to free speech, right to assembly, whatever else. Because if they're citizens, then they deserve civil rights. So we're going to give them citizenship and rights. The problem though is the fear that, okay, we pass a law today and the Republicans are in charge. But in the future, the Democrats might come back to power and get rid of this. There's always a fear that another party might come into power and get rid of it. Same thing like Obamacare. Obamacare is in place now, but the Republicans take over both houses in the presidency. What if they repeal it all? So that's always a possibility. So they said, let's make it an amendment. So the 14th Amendment is passed by Congress in 1866 to guarantee civil rights to all men, regardless of race, creed, and the term they use is condition of servitude, free or former slave or not.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, that's not women yet. Are you kidding me? Oh, no. I mean, I guess women get civil rights, but they don't get the right to vote yet. They have civil rights, but they don't get the right to vote. Sorry about that. Military Reconstruction eventually begins where they decide that the South is not yet reconstructed. So military Reconstruction is where Congress directs the military to divide the South into districts. They pretty much say, you're not allowed to be a state. You have no idea what you're doing. You're still racist. That's not okay. And so they divide the South into military districts, and they pretty much break up their identities. Virginia, I guess, gets to stay the same, because Virginia's pretty populous. But again, they divide up the South into military districts. They break up the states and say, you are not allowed to be a state because you're not doing what you're told. Really, the goal is to protect black rights, to promote Reconstruction, that kind of thing. So, I mean, the benefit is that they do industrialize the South. They build a bunch of railroads, which is much better than before, where they had nothing. There was this plantation, which was great for a while, but not forever. And then the 15th Amendment is eventually passed, giving blacks the right to vote. Whites did not like this very much, because they were afraid that they would lose significant amounts of influence and power when the blacks come to power. Johnson is eventually impeached, but not removed from office. He actually does not get removed by one vote. To be fair, he didn't really do anything unconstitutional. He went against a law that was not constitutional. And Congress passed a law that they weren't really allowed to, and he went against it, saying, you can't do that. So they impeached him. It was just politics. And they had the trial and everything, but he wasn't removed. They make it clear, impeachment does not mean to remove someone from office. Impeachment is the trial. And then, if someone's impeached, then they have a trial. So impeached is the process of investigating someone, and then you have a trial, and then you're removed from office. He fell short by one vote. Yeah, there's a process right there. He's not too happy. He's pretty upset about the whole thing. Reconstruction is also happening in the South at this time. We call this Black Reconstruction. And so there's local Reconstruction. So all that we were talking about so far is the federal government trying to fix the South. This part is about the South trying to fix themselves, more like local Reconstruction. Three groups emerge in local Reconstruction to kind of help influence Black Reconstruction. Because blacks now have the right to vote, so now they're kind of politically important. The first group are a group called the Scalawags. So it's this guy right here. The Scalawags were whites who assisted Black Reconstruction, and the Southerners hated them. These are Southern whites who supported Black Reconstruction, and they hated them. Like, oh, you're betraying your race, you're working with the blacks, that's terrible. Hated them. They call them Scalawags, like a pirate term, like you dirty scoundrel, you scalawag. On the other side, the Carpetbaggers. Looks like Waldo, Where's Waldo? And these guys were Northerners, Northern whites who moved south to help with Reconstruction. And they were called carpetbaggers because the biggest bag typically at this time was the bag for your carpet. Carpet was a big deal. So if you were going to move, you brought your carpet with you. And so you put it in a bag. And so what they did was they would take the carpet out, they put all their stuff in a carpet bag, and they moved to the south because that's the biggest bag that they had for the carpet. And so they're called carpetbaggers because they moved to the south to help Black Reconstruction as well. Also very unpopular in the South because who is this Yankee coming down to the South and telling us what to do? Not very popular in the South. And then the blacks. The blacks again get elected to power. So these are the three groups in Black Reconstruction. You had the Scalawags, the Carpetbaggers, and Black Reconstructionists. And them three together are going to try to influence reforms in the South. They're going to promote Black Reconstruction, Black rights, those kinds of things. One of the successes you should note is that Hero Revels becomes the first black senator, and Blanche K. Bruce becomes the first black congressman. So that's success. I mean, that's pretty good if you think about it. If you're looking at, who won, I think that this now is an indication that the North won. Oh, so Blanche K. Bruce was the first black congressman, and Hero Revels was the first black senator. And again, I think it's pretty clear to say that none of this would have happened if Lincoln or Johnson remained in power. They just were completely against this. It's not, again, that they were racist. They were racist, but it was just of the time. But I don't think that they thought that America was ready for this much progress. Whereas a lot of people from New York and whatever else really believed that, no, we should move forward. So this is still pretty progressive and hard for people to swallow. I don't know about Grant so much. His election, Grant's elected. He's pretty corrupt. Don't know about that. So Jim Crow laws. So Jim Crow laws started getting passed in the South, and Jim Crow laws were laws that promoted segregation. You might be familiar with Jim Crow from the Dumbo movie. He's the crow that's racist. Or like all the other Disney movies that are horribly racist. But anyways, Jim Crow, the basic idea is public facilities had to be segregated, private facilities could be segregated, that kind of thing. Segregation of blacks and whites, schools, whatever else. So I always show these kids these pictures to kind of just get them all riled up. But the basic idea is the same. Negroes and Mexicans are synonymous with dogs. This is how we feel about you. White restrooms only, colored restrooms in the back, that kind of thing. And they said, look, it's okay so long as things are equal, especially in the Plessy v. Ferguson case. Plessy v. Ferguson rules segregation is legal so long as things are equal. So, separate but equal is the phrase that Plessy v. Ferguson should be synonymous with. The idea is, look, if you want separate schools, then you have to have a black one and a white one equal. If you want separate drinking fountains, then you have to have a white one and black one. You can't say no blacks. You have to have something of equal access to blacks. Now, what that meant, though, was that sure, we could do that, but the reality was that separate but equal was inherently unequal. We're going to have a school for whites and a school for blacks, but the school for blacks will have no books. we'll have an entrance for whites and entrance for blacks, but the black entrance will rarely be served in the restaurant, and they'll be by the restrooms. Just those kind of things. And again, when it comes down to it is that if two things are equally the same, they're still inherently unequal. I mean, if you say, I have two wallets exactly the same, well, one on the left that's closer to me, so the other one to the right is inherently unequal. It's not the same. And so, Supreme Court will break this down later. The KKK is also having none of this noise, this idea of equal rights for blacks. So they're like, no, I'm not going to have that. The KKK, by the way, were intended to be ghosts. So that was the whole point. They wanted to be ghosts. They're the ghosts of the Confederacy that died, and they're here to haunt.
Did you see Django Unchained?
I have not yet.
Oh my gosh, there's a hilarious scene.
I do love it.
Like the beginning of the KKK.
Really?
It's like absolutely hilarious. Where they have their masks and the eye holes aren't perfectly lined up, so they can't see. Everyone's complaining they can't see out of it.
I definitely do want to watch Django Unchained, and then I'll see what I can show in my class at some point. I'll clip it. But no, actually, the story, Birth of a Nation, the movie comes out later that glorifies the KKK. And they say that the founder, had the idea by watching kids, like white kids, scare black kids on their sheet, pretending to be ghosts. He's like, that's what we'll do. We'll scare black people like ghosts. That's where the idea comes from. In any case, they go ahead and they assault people. I mean, it's pretty bad. I will endeavor to answer your directly, but I must tell you something about the Ku Klux Klan. They are raging on their side. They have whipped several white men, whipped and killed several Negroes. They whipped Colonel Huggins, superintendent of the free schools, nearly to death, and everybody rejoiced when they heard it, for everybody hated him. He squandered public money buying piano forts, organs, sofas, and furniture for the Negro schoolhouse in Aberdeen. So that was a white man that they killed. So they actually went off and they killed, there's more, I mean, it's a pretty long quote. But they pretty much attacked blacks and black supporters. So any carpetbaggers, any scalawags, they went off and they tried to kill them. One of my favorite scenes of the KKK is from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? If you guys ever seen that, it's a great it's a great movie during the Great Depression with George Clooney. I like the music more than anything else, but it does portray the KKK in a interesting light as well. Also, Bad Boys 2 does a good job showing the KKK in the early scenes. They sure do. They do very much do the lynching. And so the first acts are passed by Congress, where they send in the military to stop the KKK. For all intents and purposes, the KKK to the U.S. is a terrorist organization. And so they send in the military to stop them, to protect the blacks. And the whites are not too pleased about this.
Why did they go kill Congress then? Why didn't they just go kill people in Congress?
Because I think that it was too far. I mean, D.C. is so far away, and again, they knew that the military was. I mean, the military is in D.C., so they're just going to kill those locals. But the reality is, it's easier to intimidate because you didn't know who was in the KKK. I mean, pretty much most were in it, but the KKK was a secret organization, so you never knew who was in it, and they would never openly admit to being part of the KKK. Because it was, again, technically underground, and it was illegal. I mean, they were killing people left and right. And again, there were tons of people outdoors that were watching this, and no one really reported anything. And so the South began a counter-revolution. They feel that, you know what, these blacks need to go, or we need to take control of them again. The cartoon on the right is, again, a white man killing a black child, saying, I did it in self-defense. If I didn't kill you, you would have grown up and ruled me. So again, you do see the killing of children. You do see that happening as well in the South. And so this is kind of what's happening. The South is fed up with Reconstruction, and the South fight back. Now, you would argue again, so why didn't the North do anything about this? Why didn't the North just step in and prevent this from happening? And the answer is, Reconstruction lasted from 1865 to 1877. They were pretty tired by the end, and they said, and in pretty much the basic argument was, look, it's been 12 years. If you blacks can't take care of yourself by this time, well, then that's your problem. We've done our part. Also, there was a recession, and we just couldn't afford to keep dumping our money in the South when it wasn't helping. Why do you keep throwing money to a burning bush? And so they argued that it wasn't worth it. So we are trying to help them, picture this photo, but again, it's just not going to help. And so, I don't know, I need to delete this slide. And so here you have segregation, lynchings. So you do have lynchings. If you look at how many are lynched, you still have significant amounts of whites being lynched at this time. Yep. Pretty bad. In any case, here are different parts of disenfranchisement. So we slowly try to take away people's right to vote. Is that this or next? I think it's the next slide. Or next PowerPoint. Don't worry about this. Hastily compromise pretty much ends Reconstruction. The Hastily Compromise of 1877 ended Reconstruction. Pretty much, Rutherford B. Hayes was a candidate in the Hastily Compromise. And there was an electoral tie, so the agreement was, we'll let the Republican Hayes win the presidency if the North agrees to end Reconstruction, or agrees to pull the military out of the South. And if you pull the military out of the South, the KKK can do whatever it wants, and that's virtually the end of Reconstruction. It's not good. And again, we ask ourselves, so was it worth it? I mean, did we get what we wanted? Was this kind of the goal that we were expecting or not? And, not so much. The term we like to use is that the South was redeemed. Southern redemption means that the South retook South from the North. So Southern redemption. So that's Reconstruction. Any questions about Reconstruction?
So how did you do?
How'd you learn it?
Basically just the North helping the South and that's it. Nothing about the other sorts, the counter-revolution and all that. Like, I've never heard of that.
Oh yeah, no, it was pretty bad. Like, we fought all that time and then nothing came out of it. It was pretty terrible. Do I have it? Yeah, real quick, because just in case it's not part of that lecture later. Part of the Jim Crow laws, going back to Jim Crow laws, there were different kinds of Jim Crow laws. So there was segregation, but it did also try to take away voting rights. We may end up talking about this later, but it's in case we don't. It tried to restrict voting rights for blacks. So these are known as Jim Crow laws, but it's also restricting black voting rights. So there were three kinds of things that it did. The first was a literacy test. So the literacy test, you had to be able to pass a test to vote. If you could pass that, it was poll tax. I feel like this will come up. And the grandfather clause, yeah. And there's a grandfather clause. Exactly. If your grandfather couldn't vote, then you can't vote. And of course your grandfather couldn't vote because your grandfather was a slave. So that's how they got you. It's pretty smart. Alright, so about Gilded Age politics, again, we don't have to know most of this, but we'll go through it pretty quickly.
So in the 15th Amendment, when blacks got the right to vote, was that they had the right to vote, or was that a 2/3 vote?
No, they had the right to vote.
They had the right to vote.
Yep. They had the right to vote. And they took out, it pretty much overturned the Three-Fifths Compromise.
Okay.
It overturned that. And they had a full right to vote. But they wouldn't be able to exercise it because there'd be intimidation and whatever else. Because states actually do still have the right to determine what are the requirements to vote in your state. I mean, each state has that right to determine qualifications. That's part of states' rights. Which is why we have the Voting Rights Act right now, which is currently being reviewed by the Supreme Court to see if the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965 to see, because the South was still trying to suppress black votes. And so today, it's 2012, and those laws still apply to the South, and the Southern states argue that they shouldn't anymore because they're open and free and they're more, they don't try to restrict black votes anymore. And so they're actually suing to get rid of the voting rights restrictions for the South because they believe it's unfair. We'll see what happens. It'll be kind of interesting. It's being taken up by the Supreme Court right now. And it's not just the South, though. There are actually different parts of the country. Like, there are parts in Central California that the Voting Rights Act applies to. Usually, I think it's the issue of if a small percentage of minorities are voting in your state or in your county, then the Voting Rights Commission will come in to determine if there was any attempt to stop those people from voting, and if there is even a hint of that, then they're going to evaluate your voting system every time that it comes up. So it does take a lot of power. In any case, you'll see a lot of trusts and corruption and whatever else. It's called the Gilded Age. A lot of stuff happens. The Gilded Age is what we're talking about today. The Gilded Age was known by Mark Twain. It's supposed to be like this period of niceness was really a period of corruption. Gilded is like wrapped in like a gilded flower. So I describe my kids as like it's a piece of poop wrapped in gold. It looks good, but the substance is terrible. That's a basic idea. Because the economy was doing really, really well. You had technology, you had trains, you had Kodak cameras, you had typewriters, amazing stuff coming out at this time. And yet, with all this amazingness, the common people were not benefiting. And so, was it really good for people? If you look at the left side are people that are wealthy, your Carnegies, your Rockefellers, your JP Morgans doing really, really well. And yet your families on the right, they're struggling, their kids have to go to work and stuff. Is that really life? That's good. So they said no. And politicians did nothing. You don't have to worry about that so much. This is for AP. So pretty much they promote a laissez-faire government, a government that did not get involved, a do-nothing government. I'm a proud teacher now that my students always know what this term means. So the government does not want to get involved, we call it laissez-faire. I know that term now. And pretty much the argument in this picture was that the government did not get involved, and therefore businesses, big business, took advantage because there was no government regulation. Are you guys familiar with the term trusts? Trusts and monopolies are the same thing. And so monopolies, large companies, began to take form, and they would take advantage of a laissez-faire government who would not regulate. If we had a laissez-faire government today, then Microsoft and Google and Apple could all merge together into a super techno company. And that would just happen because the government says, if they want to do it, so be it. But a government would never allow that because they would say, well, what's going to happen to all the other businesses? That's going to destroy competition. You can't have that. Laissez-faire was pretty much pure capitalism at the time. It's the pureness of what it's supposed to be because capitalism will breed corruption. That's just the way it is. But, if people decide they don't want corruption, they shouldn't buy from those people. That's a basic idea. Then you have all this stuff. So, grantism. You should know about President Grant. Grantism suggests that you have a corrupt presidential administration because Grant's administration was very corrupt. We don't know if he himself was corrupt because he never actually signed any of the documentation of things that happened. So if he wasn't corrupt, he was just really stupid or a bad judge of character because the people that he appointed, like his cabinet secretaries, were just really, really corrupt. So, case in point, don't worry about that one. Credit mobilier scandal is probably the most important. Credit mobilier scandal is a railroad scandal. Pretty much the basic idea was that they hired it's a railroad scandal. Just write that down. You have to know the details of the railroad scandal. But the basic idea was that they hired Union Pacific to build a railroad, and then Union Pacific hired themselves to build it. So they contracted to themselves. And then they asked, hey, Union Pacific, how much is it going to cost to build a railroad? $100,000. Oh, well, how much is it going to cost? Oh, I meant $800,000. Hey, federal government, it's going to cost $800,000 to build a railroad. Are you sure? Yeah, this other guy told me it's going to cost $800,000. You got it. And so Union Pacific did itself $800,000 when it really should have only cost $100,000. So they self-contracted. They didn't tell anybody. They jacked up the price. And it was able to pass through because Union Pacific was bribing all of these congressmen here in this picture. And so pretty much the cartoon is that they're trying to take a slice of the pie, and then Uncle Sam finds them, and they're all trying to run out and hide. So all these people were culpable in the Credit Mobilier scandal. Credit Mobilier was a fake company that they made up, if you guys are curious. Whiskey ring scandal. This is where they stole funds from the whiskey tax, and they just pocketed it. So the U.S. Treasury Secretary was just stealing money from the whiskey tax. You shouldn't do that. The Belknap scandal, don't worry about. You should know Boss Tweed also. Boss Tweed is a political machine. It pretty much, he just represents inner city corruption. He's a political machine, or a political boss. And the basic idea is he would always win because he would get who to vote for him. You guys know? Immigrants. He would get immigrants to vote for him. Because here's the promise. Oh, you go to America? How about this? I will find you cheap housing and a place to work, and all I ask is that you vote for me in the next election. And to be fair, that's a pretty sweet deal. If you're an immigrant, what do you care? You're not here to vote. You're here to, work. And so this guy's going to offer you housing? Sure, I'll vote for you. Anyway, you probably vote for him anyway because he was the nice guy that offered you a place to stay. And so it worked out. He took advantage of immigrants, and these political bosses came to power. That's what happens. Eventually, he would just stuff the ballot. He would just do like outright corruption, and he would just, he would bring a guy, he'd put a hat on him, hey, go vote, and then when the guy would come out, take the hat off, he'd go vote, and he would like, put a different jacket on, he would go vote. Just like get the same people to go vote over and over and over again. I think in one reported situation, someone voted like 17 times, just in these fake elections. Don't worry about that. Like 1772. There's a panic. Jim Crow laws. Oh, here you go. So Jim Crow laws. Literacy tests. We talked about that. So I always like the cartoon on the left there. Education qualifications. The black man order be educated afore he can vote us with us whites. So white people weren't even educated. To be fair, it was rich whites who passed the literacy tests because they also did not want poor whites to vote. But poor whites like, blacks shouldn't vote, we should pass literacy tests, only to realize they couldn't pass them either. So.
Have you seen those tests? I
thought I brought them, I forgot, but I actually had pulled them and I'll bring them next week, but I actually had some. They're great. Actually, one of my students told me he was taking a college class and the professor gave it to him like as a pop quiz, and all the kids were freaking out, and then he knew what it was because he'd seen it before, so he was like, I didn't sweat it. I knew what this was. But no, they were crazy. They were pretty intense. And there's actually a difference between the test they gave to whites and the test they gave to blacks. They're very different. It's like, who is the current Secretary of Labor? Hilda Solis. She's an alumni of the high school I currently teach at. It's pretty neat, yeah. So we're going to be talking about, who's also someone who sat in this chair. Poll taxes, you guys know, and grandfather clause. You can't vote for grandfather can't vote. So again, if you're white, it's a escalator all the way to the top. But if you're black, if you hop over the literacy test, I think that's good, but you have to get past the racist. If you get past that, you get past the poll tax. But you have to get past the KKK. If you get past that, there's a grandfather clause. If you get past that, they'll just kill you. So it's one of those things where, sure, you could vote. You just gotta be lucky. We're not stopping them from voting. We're just setting up barriers to make sure that only the right people vote. Many black people did leave the South because they said, screw this is too much work. So they called the exodusters. They're just blacks who left the South for Kansas. Exodusters. Then there's some racist stuff going on in the West as well. In California, the Chinese Exclusion Act, pretty much we just banned the Chinese because they were taking jobs. Many people believe that the Chinese were scared out or chased out because we didn't like the fact they were taking our gold mines, but that was not the case. Do you guys know what the most profitable industry was during the gold rush at the time? It wasn't gold mining. It was laundry. They made so much money just doing those men's laundry, and they pay them in gold. So yeah, you just do people's laundry, you make money. And so the Chinese were organized. If you look at the bottom right there, there's a Chinese man with a washboard, and he's being chased out by technology. But the basic idea is that the Chinese Exclusion Act, they pretty much began to decide that Chinese were no longer allowed to immigrate to the U.S. because there were race riots happening in California at the time. In fact, a group called the Carnegies, led by this guy, they were scalping the Chinese because they had the ponytails, so they were just cutting them off and scalping them because there was a race riot. So that was pretty bad, and you have to worry about this case. Don't worry about this one. Garfield was assassinated. It sucks. So because of the Garfield was assassinated, maybe you should know that. President Garfield is assassinated due to the party patronage system or the spoil system. You guys know the party patronage system or the spoil system? The basic idea, I'm pretty sure you've heard of it before, just not describing those terms. It's the idea that I give you a job in the government because you're my friend or you gave me money or whatever. That's spoil system or party patronage. It's like nepotism. And so the basic idea was that this guy on the left, Charles Guiteau, he was not given the job that he wanted. And so he killed President Garfield, assuming that would get him what he wanted, which is obviously not the case. He was deranged, he was crazy, he didn't get the job that he wanted. And so they realized, wow, this government system is pretty corrupt now that people are willing to kill for office. And so they said, maybe we should change the way people get jobs, and you can't just appoint your friends into office anymore. Because this just wasn't just like, cabinet position. This was like the secretary in the office of the Housing Urban Division on 3rd Street in Los Angeles. Like, it was every government position you could just appoint your friends to. So they said maybe we should change that because people are dying, so they did. They passed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. So you guys familiar with the civil service exam? In order to work for the government, you have to take a civil service exam. Same idea. Pretty much it becomes a merit-based system, so you get chosen based on your merit and not on your friends. Okay, don't worry about that, or that, nope. Populist Party, you know Populist Party. So the Populist Party was a party that supported farmers. Pretty much farmers felt that they were being taken advantage of by railroads. So the Populist Party formed as a group of farmers across the country that tried to fight railroads. Again, if you look, the Populist Party, there's a Populist Party balloon. It's made up of different parties. It's made up of labor union. It's made up of the Free Silver Party, Prohibition Party, Farmers Alliance, Greenback Party. Pretty much, they were a pro-farmer party that tried to fight against railroad trusts or railroad monopolies because the farmers felt like they were being taken advantage of. Sure, you know Jacob Coxey's army as well. In 1893, there was a depression. The economy got really bad. And so in 1893, Jacob Coxey has an army of the unemployed march to Washington. And pretty much these 1,000 march to Washington and they ask Congress to spend $500 million on public works projects. Why might they want Congress to build public works projects like roads, canals, bridges, schools? Jobs, yeah. Jobs. So whenever we talk about public works, it's always to create jobs. Like you see all the signs all over the place, like the Federal Road Act. It's for jobs. It's not to build the road. I mean, the roads is a side benefit. It's really to create jobs. But yeah, Coxey's Army, demand jobs. You see this a lot happening. People march on Washington a lot. So that's that. That's the first part of the Gilded Age. Let's do... What's this? Yeah, let's talk about the growth of rise of industrial America. Again, you have to know everything here. I'm just going to skip to all the key stuff here. But the rise of industrial America, the key things you should be aware of are, number one, you have the growth of railroads at this time, so that's pretty critical. You see railroads forming at this time. The most important railroad, though, was the Transcontinental Railroad. So you see the emergence of transcontinental railroads during this time period. Okay. So there's a lot of them. Here they are. Well, there it is, Transcontinental Railroad. Good times. There was a race between Central Pacific and Union Pacific, so you should know the two companies that built the Transcontinental Railroad. But they built from like Omaha, and the other one built from Sacramento or San Francisco, and they were supposed to meet in the center at a Promontory Point, Utah, and there was a race. And in fact, one of them, Union Pacific, was able to lay down 10 miles of track in a day, which is actually pretty impressive. So, 10 miles, pretty good. Don't know about that so much. So Transcontinental Railroads, different ones. Improvements. Yeah, so I think one of the key improvements was an air brake. Before they couldn't brake well, and so they were always not on time, and they always missed their stops because it took them like 30 times to brake. Also, they had what became known as standard gauges. Oops. Standard gauges. One of the biggest problems for them at the time was that all the railroad companies were making different sized tracks. So your train could not travel across the country. You could only travel on your line. They're called trunk lines, and each trunk line was completely different. So eventually we realized this is dumb. we should have one kind of track. And so before it was the meter gauge, then the broad gauge. We eventually rely on the standard gauge, which is why all tracks are now 4 feet 8.5 inches. Because otherwise you'd have to unload. Very, very not good anyway. Steel rails always a plus. And these are Pullman cars. Pullman cars were like first class. I mean, they're fancier than like people's houses today. But the basic idea is that if you're going to travel across the country for like 10 days, you might as well live in luxury if you can afford it. So Pullman luxury cars, or Pullman palace cars, were the place to be. Railroad pools, railroad rebates and kickbacks. Interstate Commerce Act was passed to try to regulate railroads because they felt like that maybe railroads were charging prices that were too high to farmers. So the ICC was designed to regulate interstate commerce. Are you guys familiar with the term interstate commerce? What that means? It's just any business that goes between states. The ones that operate within a state is intrastate commerce, so that always comes up as inter versus intra, just know the difference. Bell created the telephone, depending on who you talk to. Recent studies show that he actually stole the patent from someone else. Thomas Edison also stole stuff from Nikola Tesla, so yes, he invented the light bulb, but he probably stole it. Mimeograph, kinetoscope, all that fun stuff. Don't worry about Gustavus Swift. He created refrigerated train cars, so that was pretty sweet. George Eastman created Kodak film and the portable camera. King Gillette was my favorite one. Safety razor. So you can just, I always like to tell my kids before, so you just take a knife to their face and it's like, oh my god. I'm afraid you're gonna kill yourself each time. It's a lot of different inventions, stuff you don't have to know. That's some more process you don't know. So we're gonna start building skyscrapers at this time. And we're going to build it with steel. But steel was not perfect yet until the Bessemer process. So what the Bessemer process did was it made steel stronger. You know how I'm not sure if you guys familiar with like wooden beams, but there's a knot in a wooden beam. That's probably not a good beam because that's like a weak point. And it's the same with Henry Bessemer. Like a steel beam was made out of iron. And so sometimes you had steel but still had a lot of iron deposits in it. It wasn't very pure, it wasn't very strong, and so it would crack because that iron just wasn't as strong as the rest of the material, and that would break the whole thing. So the Henry Bessemer process made steel pure, it made steel strong. That was the basic idea. So the guy who took advantage of that is Andrew Carnegie, and Andrew Carnegie makes his money through Carnegie Steel. Actually, his name is pronounced Carnegie. So if you want to get fancy, he's Carnegie, not Carnegie. He makes his money off of Carnegie Steel. He is your rags to riches story. So before Jay-Z, there was Andrew Carnegie. He really was a rags to riches story. Family of immigrants. He worked in a small steel factory and worked his way up to become one of the wealthiest people in history. He created his monopoly or his massive company through vertical integration. And what vertical integration means is that he bought all the factors of production. Vertical integration means that you create a monopoly by buying all the factors of production. So if I want to compete against Burger King and Wendy's, and I want to create a monopoly, what I'm going to do through vertical integration is I'm going to buy all the meat companies, cheese companies, vegetable companies, and that way my opponents, they can't make the same product anymore. So you buy all the factors of production, and that way your opponents will go out of business and you're the only one left. So that's vertical integration. You have a monopoly by buying all the factors of production, all the levels of production. Smart. It's a good way to do it. So that way, like, all the other coal companies can no longer make their steel, or all the steel companies can make steel because he bought all the coal or he bought all the iron. He did believe in philanthropy. Philanthropy, by the way, is not the same as charity. Charity is like giving relief to the people when they like go to church and give people to the poor. Philanthropy is not the same thing. Philanthropy is like building schools, giving back to society, building libraries and museums. That's philanthropy. He believed in the gospel of wealth that we should give back to philanthropy, not to charity. Because he said charity makes people lazy. They should work. But philanthropy could give people an education. Carnegie Mellon, all those other schools. Now, the thing that kind of was introduced was this thing called the Horatio Alger myth then, that you could be just like Andrew Carnegie with hard work, honesty, and a little bit of luck. That's all you needed to be a Carnegie. Hard work, honesty, and a little bit of luck. And the problem with that, and even today, part of the American dream rhetoric, is that that's a very dangerous story to tell anyone. If that's all you need, then are you not honest? Are you not working hard? Are you just not lucky? If those are the three key components, well, that's kind of a horrible, horrible story to tell. And so I think that this is a good time to have a conversation with your students about, because we still have the American story today. If you just try really hard, you can do it too. But I know tons of people that work really, really hard. I work really, really hard. I'm not a millionaire, but I work really, really hard. And so I think that this is a good teaching moment to talk about the American dream and what those expectations are, and what are good versus realistic expectations. Eventually he sells Carnegie Steel to U.S. Steel. He sells to J.P. Morgan rather, which becomes U.S. Steel. This becomes the largest company in the world. They employ like 16 million people. It's crazy. It's crazy huge. Still traded on the U.S. stock exchange today, USX. Still traded today. But yeah, becomes the largest company. He sold it for $400 million because, why not? And that's $400 million back then. Just keep that in mind. So, next guy you should know is John D. Rockefeller. He made his money through Standard Oil. He sold oil. This guy's ruthless. So Carnegie was at least kind of a nice guy. John D. Rockefeller is like OG. He believed in horizontal integration. John D. Rockefeller, who ran Standard Oil. Trust. Pretty much he was able to conquer his industry by controlling both oil companies and the railroad companies, because the railroad companies would ship his oil across, back and forth, so he controlled both railroads and oil companies, and thus he had his monopoly. He believed in horizontal integration, which is not the same as vertical integration. Vertical integration is buying all the factors of production. Horizontal is what you guys think of today. It's where you buy all your competitors. So McDonald's buys Burger King, Wendy's, In-N-Out. That's how you create a monopoly. Or you buy Hagelbargers, which is the restaurant upstairs. He believed in the policy of rule or ruin. He gave you a choice. You either let me buy your company, or, again, imagine, you're a small company, or I will drive my prices so low for the next 3 months that you cannot compete. You will be driven out of business, and then I will buy you. Your choice. But he was ruthless. He would destroy his enemies if they ever opposed him. And then there's J.P. Morgan, who is just the wealthiest man I ever teach about. He makes his money off of banking. He's the first billionaire. But again, at a time when you could buy a car for $1,200, he has $1 billion. Just think about that for a second. He bailed the U.S. government out of a depression twice. He said, yeah, you guys did $60 million in gold? Here you go. I will bail the U.S. out of a depression. So he's that guy that can bail the U.S. out of a depression. He was so influential that, again, when we're steering the course, it's J.P. Morgan on the right that's steering the boat, not Uncle Sam on the left. He's the one dominating the U.S. economy. He's the one dominating, America. Pretty much he wants to conquer the entire world. There are two terms you should know. Captains of industry. Are these people good? The argument is yes. You could argue that captains of industry were good for society because it created jobs, created efficiency. Without them, we wouldn't have America today. So they were good because they created efficiency and they created jobs. We can't get mad at them for that. However, if you look at the bottom part there, though, their success and all those things are on the backs of workers. So the other term we like to use is robber barons. Were these guys really the best, or were they more like thieves stealing from the poor and giving to the rich? Did they make poor working conditions? Yes. Did they destroy competition? Yes. And so both conversations can be had. But yeah. The government tries to regulate monopolies So we passed the Sherman Anti-Trust Act to try to break trusts. It's never used to break trusts, though. Instead, we use it to break labor unions, which was not its intended purpose. So, let's see, that's that, and the growth of cities in American culture. We need one little bit of this. Urbanization, you guys know the term? Okay, so make cities more urbanized, to make it more city-like. If you see, more and more people are moving to the cities. During the late 1800s, more people are moving into the cities and less on the farms, primarily because of jobs, and also jobs. Farms are not that exciting anymore. The cities have electricity, they have theater, they have lights, they have skyscrapers, and so there's an attraction of the city. People are moving to the city more and more. So you have urban growth. If you notice, Los Angeles is still a very small town at this time. But it grows pretty drastically at that time to about 100,000. And so in a 30-year period, it has one of the largest growth rates. Seattle, though, is a 21,000% increase. It's pretty spectacular at the time. Because people are still moving west at this time. Transcontinental Railroad is good. We can move. Skyscrapers getting raised at this time. So you should have some skyscrapers are being built during the Gilded Age or this time period. Don't have to worry about the buildings of Marshall's. Marshall's no longer in business, but one of the first buildings was Marshall's, one of the first department stores. No longer there. Frank Lloyd Wright is one of the more fun architects. Here's Frank Lloyd Wright's building. This is my favorite, Falling Water. You can buy this in Lego Farm. It's pretty sweet. We developed suspension bridges for the first time, so that's pretty sweet. So the Brooklyn Bridge is the first suspension bridge, which is considered to be a pretty amazing feat because bridges are not held up from the bottom, they're actually pulled upwards by those wires. Yeah. And the real reason why we build suspension bridges is so that they can swing. Because wind. Because they're so long. Suspension bridges are for long distances, but we're concerned about vibration, we're concerned about wind, and so the bridges are actually allowed to wave a little bit. And so if you had it just built on the ground, they would crumble eventually. But if you have it swinging from the top, it actually will give way. And if you're in San Francisco, for example, right before an earthquake or right after an earthquake, you'll see the bridge like going back and forth. It's pretty cool. Also, it's pretty amazing how they were able to figure that out. Engineering, pretty cool. Electric trolleys, so this makes it easier to travel from city to city, uphill, downhill. There's like that Angel stairway or whatever. The Angel flights in downtown LA, one of the first trolleys. It's like go up 2 stories, pay a quarter. Subways are emerging for the first time. If you notice, there's very little clearance in the subways. I mean, today people go down there and walk on the side, or movies have them, but in the old subways, very little clearance at all. Very, very little clearance. Yeah, cities exciting, whatever else. Problems of urbanization. There's a problem that you start having all these people move to the cities and it gets crowded, diseased, and so you do have problems of urbanization. It's disease, it's overcrowded, you have a lot of immigrants. It's dirty. The sewer systems are pretty terrible. If you look on the left side there, that is a dead horse, and the kids are playing in pretty much the sewer. It's an exposed sewer. That's where all the crap and the feces and the poop goes, and it's just right there. And the rainwater will just rush that all away. But that's city living at the time. It's not very modern. Many families ended up living in dumbbell tenements. So apartments in the slums were called dumbbell tenements. Just because of the shape. These are very small apartments. They're about 8 by 6, so tiny. So imagine having your entire family live in a dumbbell tenement. It's not very good at all. And so a man by the name of Jacob Reese wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives. He looks like the guy from Cheers. Like the mailman from Cheers. I don't know if you guys watch Cheers at all, but he looks like that guy. In any case, he wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives, which describes the poor living conditions in the cities. He describes the slums, the ghettos. This is a book that usually comes up, so you should know how the other half lives. It's a pretty common one. It's about tenement slum living, how life in the city was just not good. See, I mean, imagine having a family of 5 living in a community like that. I mean, that's just life. You rarely took a shower, and you share a bed. Yeah. But I mean, this is life. I mean, there is no, I mean, we talk about, oh, it's just a room, but yeah, I mean, there is no private space. It's, you all share a room. That's your living, sleeping, dining quarters, all right there. I mean, everyone has to work while they're there, so it's not good. You have all the little areas, you have more 5-star lodging, men's lodging. You know, if you can't find a place to stay, you stay at these open areas, women's lodging, and you just sleep on the floor. It's just, this is what you do. When you're done at work, this is what you come home to. I mean, that's it. Wine beggar, Italian rag picker, basement saloons, gangs, kids playing on the streets, immigrants, families working, whatever else. You do have a period of new immigration at this time, so there is a difference between new immigration and old immigration. Here's the difference. Old immigrants in the 1840s were mostly Irish and German. They're mostly Northern and Western Europeans. Whereas new immigrants are Southern and Eastern Europeans. So they're like your Italians, your Greeks, your Russians, your Jews. The biggest difference between them is that the old immigrants could speak English and the new ones could not. So language is a big difference. So English here, none here. Religion is also different. No, the new immigrants are Jewish and Orthodox Christian or Orthodox Catholic, whereas all the old immigrants were like Protestants. And so you just have a change in religion. No English. Most of the new immigrants are poor.
Do we call them gypsies sometimes, like the newer immigrants?
If you were a gypsy, sure. But the gypsies were roaming, nomadic peoples, and most of them were Romanian for the most part, but the British gypsies were roaming peoples of the European areas. And then if you came here, you could be gypsy and living in America, but that was specific immigrant. Here's a slide that comes up like 10 times for some reason. I don't know why. Sailing to America was not fun. Obviously, you guys are familiar with give me you're tired, you're poor, your heart of masses, your knees breathe free. Pretty cool. That was in 1876. Also, the original color was bronze. Or copper, rather. It was not green. That's just oxidation over time. But we liked it, so we kept it. Most immigrants came through Ellis Island, so you might be able to find friends and family at Ellis Island. Actually, we were able to find my fiance's family when they came to Ellis Island through there. Pretty cool.
Alright, Ellis Island, Angel Island.
Yes, Angel Island is for the Chinese. So there's that. Immigrants coming in, tests, whatever else. Yep. We already talked about political machines, so you should know. Social gospel movement was one way to help immigrants. Pretty much the basic idea of social gospel was to apply Christianity to social reform. Again, apply Christianity to social reform. By Walter Rauschenbusch. Another way was the settlement house movement. These were middle-class women that moved into the ethnic neighborhoods or the ethnic slums, and they would try to educate these immigrant communities. They would try to educate immigrant communities as best they could. So Jane Addams is best known for Hull House. She was one of her settlement houses where she would invite immigrants over. She would teach them English, maybe give them job training. But they might also babysit and watch the kids because both parents had to work. They would teach them about American holidays, that kind of thing. Here they are working in Hull House. These freaky children because they can't sit still. So you have nativism returning at this time. So nativism is anti-foreignism. The basic idea is that this stems back to like the 1840s when these British Americans were like, get out of my country. You can't just immigrate to America and just take the land from us. You can't do that. So go back to your own country. And they called themselves Native Americans, which is ironic because we just say Native Americans. And then they said that British Americans said that to like the Irish and the Germans. And then in the 1890s, the Irish and Germans were like, what are you Greeks and Italians coming to our country for? Why don't you go back to your own country? You can't just come here and take our jobs. Leave these jobs for us Native Americans. And eventually the Italians, the Russians, and they're like, what are these Mexicans doing in our country? No, you can't just come here and take our jobs. Those jobs are for us Native Americans. And I'll let you know, like 2,000 years from now, people are like, what are these Martians doing taking our jobs? These jobs are us for Mexicans. These are for Native Americans. It's the same thing. It's cyclical. Eventually you become Americanized, and then the next group will come in and say, I worked hard to get to where I am. You gotta get to the back of the line. So you have that. The best picture here is this. The argument that all these wealthy Americans now were once immigrants themselves, but they forget that they're trying to tell this immigrant you're not allowed. So it's a really strong picture of what's happening. Chinese Exclusion Act, you know already. Sorry, Chinese people, you're not allowed in America. Get out. I don't know about Chinese education. You should know Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington, he believed in economic equality. And he promoted vocational education. He said the only way for whites to take us seriously is to show that we can work. So we should have, again, economic equality and vocational education. You should show the whites you know how to work with your hands. If you can work with your hands, they'll hire you all the time. The problem with that is that it says black people should only work with their hands, and they're never going to be managers or doctors or whatever. They're always going to be labor. But he said, no, we have to prove that we can work first, and then they'll take us seriously after, which is kind of a dangerous argument. Whereas the other guy, this guy, Webb Du Bois, he said that blacks deserve full equality, political, economic, social equality. And he said that blacks should go to college. Not vocational education, not like going to DeVry. He means like get a college education. He was a Harvard graduate, so that gives you an indication of why he believed education was so important. And he created the NAACP to help blacks go to college. Hearst and Pulitzer are just well-known newspaper journalists. The two terms that we associate with them are yellow journalism, and sensationalism, which means the exact same thing. William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. The Pulitzer Prize, you guys know, is like the award-winning journalism award, and Hearst, he has that castle up in mid-California. And so these guys you should know is, again, yellow journalists or sensationalists. This is where they would have newspapers like, let's say, I don't know, there was a flood and like 3 people died. So their newspaper article would be, the end of the world begins in Ohio. Just very dramatic, over-stylized stories. I mean, again, it's still newspapers, so why not? Again, these are just examples. Just stuff like that. Again, that is not a newspaper. Yeah, women's rights. National American Women's Suffrage Association is just trying to promote women's suffrage, right to vote, so it's no NASA if you know it already. Colored women had to get their own though. Temperance prohibition. National women, you guys know temperance is, right? Temperance is trying to eliminate alcohol. So if you guys are familiar with the term temperance, it's trying to get rid of alcohol. This is Carrie A. Nation, who's a hatchetonian, who actually went into bars with a hatchet and just began to destroy bars. She was ruthless. And she was like to start destroying casks of like alcohol, like God tells me to destroy all this, but it's a sin. And she used to go in there, and everyone was kind of afraid of her because she was carrying a tomahawk wherever she went. So there's that. Anti-Saloon League is against alcohol, you can figure that out. Fun stuff you don't have to know. So that's that. A little bit about Native Americans. I think it's this one. Frederick Jackson Turner and Turner thesis. This is the thesis he makes of the significance of the frontier in American history. Well, we're actually halfway. Do you want to take a break first before we move forward? Sure. Okay, we'll do that. We'll take a break and then we'll move forward thereafter.
I'll see you Saturday, sorry.
Okay, no problem. So Frederick Jackson Turner wrote a book called The Significance of the Frontier on American History. It's also known as the Turner Thesis, and he makes two key arguments. The first is that the frontier, or like nature, was critical to the American identity. You know, when the colonists first came, and they built houses and they built a country, that frontier is what made us American. You know, the ingenuity, that individualism. We helped ourselves. But the other thing he argued was that the frontier also served as a safety valve. A safety valve. That when the cities got too crowded, when the problems were there, you could always move west. And so that was the argument also, is that the Turner thesis is about American frontier being critical to the American identity, and that the frontier served as a safety valve for America. The problems of the city could be relieved by allowing that crowded city people to move to the west. So there is some Native American policies you should be familiar with. The first is that we do eventually force Native Americans onto reservations because we take their land from them. And we say, you have to stay here now, but don't worry, we promise we won't take your land anymore, which we promised back in 1787, we promised that in 1803, we promised that in 1880. I mean, we promised this over and over again, and we have a history of breaking our promises. So we say, fine, how about this? You stay on these Indian reservations, you stay here, and we promise you can stay there forever. That's great, and actually Native Americans said, okay, we'll say yes reluctantly because we don't really have a choice. But the problem is that this actually did destroy their culture. And one of the major reasons why is that we killed the buffalo. One of the biggest dramatic changes to Native American culture in America was when we killed the buffalo. And we killed the buffalo pretty drastically. The numbers are that in 1800 there were 65 million buffalo. Wow. And by 1870 there were 1,000 left. I mean, we literally destroyed the buffalo. And if you look at it, why? I mean, a lot of them were killed to feed railroad workers. So they were going to Transcontinental Railroad, we just killed them. And that picture on the bottom left there, this, oops. That's just a pile of buffalo skulls. And so yeah, we killed just quite a bit of them. So if you imagine this as just being all buffalo skulls. Yeah, that's all buffalo skulls right there. You also notice that because buffaloes were just so prominent everywhere, you just killed buffalo for sport. I mean, you would get on a train, you would shoot buffalo from the train. You wouldn't go out and get it. You just did it because you like shooting things. So that's kind of what happened there. You sold the buffaloes for the skins as well, but again, you just killed the buffalo because there's just so many of them. You can't miss. Eventually, here are not all, but here are many of the Native American nations before we got here, and here's where they are now. So it's a pretty drastic change over time. They lose all that land, and there's all Native Americans today. So it's a pretty drastic change from what they currently had.
I'm actually Native American, and I can see my tribe now.
Oh, yeah.
In Wisconsin, the Monopolies.
Oh, cool. There you go. So yeah, I mean, broken promises, and then so that's what happened. So you once had all of this, you are now, there. It's now to this. And so the changes there are pretty dramatic as a result. And so a woman by the name of Helen Hunt Jackson wrote a book called A Century of Dishonor. And the book was about all the broken promises that the American government made to Native Americans. The argument being that, look, we promised them all these things and we took it away, we took it away, we took it away. That should be dishonorable. but we should be ashamed of ourselves. So what she did was she made a recommendation. She said, we have to save these Native Americans. And the only way to save their lives, and I want to make that clear, she wanted to save their lives, was to assimilate them. And so what you see the beginning of are the Carlisle schools. And the Carlisle school was designed to promote Native American assimilation. She said, if these Native Americans continue to be Native Americans, they'll stick out like a sore thumb and the whites will kill them. They're going to take away their land. But if we make them American, we'll save their lives, we'll save their livelihoods. And there wasn't really an interest in the culture. And so what happened was that we began to send Native American children to Carlisle schools. And at these schools, we would force American culture on them. They weren't allowed to speak they weren't allowed to speak their native tongues. They would be beaten if they did. They had to play American sports, whatever else. I mean, it was Americanization of Native Americans, and they were punished for practicing their culture. They would cut their hair short. They would say, tribal ownership is bad. And again, by the time these kids came back to their tribes, they weren't the same thing. And this is argued to be one of the major reasons why so many tribes died, is that you couldn't pass it on to your children. Languages were dying out by this time because it wasn't being passed out. Traditions were dying because they weren't being passed on. So the Carlisle school really did a number on the Native American tribes. But to go a step further, they decided that we also have to make sure these Native Americans are more American, the adults also, so they came up with the Dawes Severalty Act. And what the Dawes Severalty Act did was that it eliminated tribal ownership. So before, the Native Americans were very much into communal ownership. The elders, we own this land together as a clan, as a tribe, as a family. The American government said, no, that's weird. We don't do that here. That's in America, we have private ownership. So what they did was, again, they broke up tribal ownership and they individualized. The term I like to use was that they individualized to civilize. They individualized to civilize. They took away their land and said, you own this, and you own this, and you own, that's your land, not everyone's land, that's your property, to instill it in those American values. And then they held a carrot above them, and they said, look, if you stay on this land for 25 years, it might be 5 years, but if you stay on this land, I don't remember how many long, 25 years seems like a long time, but it might be 25 years, we'll give you American citizenship. So if you stay on this land for 25 years, we're going to give you American citizenship. And that was a pretty good carrot because American citizenship meant power. You could vote. And so many Native Americans, they began to kind of shuck off their Native American cultures, like following and hunting the buffalo and being nomadic and going on pilgrimages. And they turned away from that and they said, okay, fine, if I become an American citizen, I'll maybe have more opportunities for my kids. And so that's another way that Native American cultures were destroyed. As we kind of move into more modern immigration reforms today in America, one of the conversations is what are the expectations for getting citizenship today, and that might be things like having to learn English and whatever else. And so it's kind of similar. Native Americans were pretty excited about all of this, and so in one last form of Native American resistance, you have the ghost dance movement. And the ghost dance movement was the belief that the Native Americans were going to empower themselves with the power and the blessings of their ancestors. And in this way, they would be able to rise up against the Americans. And this was a spontaneous movement that began to span across all the Great Plains. So even though it began with the Sioux tribes, it actually spread across the country, and the Americans got scared. They thought, oh my gosh, the Native Americans might actually band together and fight back against the Americans. And so, back. And so the U.S. Army ultimately ends the ghost dance movement at the Battle of Wounded Knee. The Battle of Wounded Knee is where they accidentally end up killing about 190 Native Americans, men, women, children. And they had surrounded the tribe, and what did happen was that a cannon accidentally went off, and it killed those people standing in a circle. And so many people did die at the Battle of Wounded Knee, thus ending any significant Native American resistance thereafter. Talk about mining so much. Should be familiar with cattle drives. So it's not like cattle frontiers, like cows. It's known as a long drive where you have to move the cows up from Texas all the way to the cow towns. Here's pictures of your American cowboys. Fun fact, cowboys are actually Mexican. They're not actually American culture, so we think of cowboys being like this deep down American thing. No, we stole cowboys from the vaquero. They were Mexican cowboys before they were American cowboys, so we stole that from the Mexicans. And actually, most cowboys would be like, oh, Clint Eastwood's like, most of the cowboys were white. No, most cowboys were black or Mexican, because no reasonable white person wanted to do that job if they didn't have to, because it sucked. You got paid $1 a day to be in charge of all these cows. And again, you would always have to do with like cattle rustlers and cattle wranglers, and people might try to kill you. You might die from stampede, and you get paid $1 a day, which is not very much. And imagine, what's the picture I like? That's you with all those cows, and that's your responsibility. I mean, who would want to do that? Besides the movie City Slickers, this doesn't look fun. And so the idea was that actually most people that could afford it would not be a cowboy. Now we romanticize like being on the West and whatever else. If that was true, there'd be a lot more white cowboys. But there weren't. There was mostly blacks and Mexicans because no one wanted to do the job. Obviously, the cows would be sold for meat. So we send to cow towns. We would then ship them to like Chicago and New York to eat them. And the farming frontier. So farming in the Midwest was pretty terrible because the soil is not as good yet. Now, many of these farms come from homesteads. The Homestead Act of 1863. This is where pretty much Abraham Lincoln signed a law giving cheap land to anyone that wanted to move west. That's the basic idea. So we gave away all this land. And, families began moving out. I like to think this woman is like brandishing a knife and threatening someone not to touch her daughters or something. Like, you stay away from my family. Now, there weren't any trees out in the West, so they had to struggle, and many of them had to build sod houses, which are just bricks made out of dirt. It's a sod house. So they got creative. Again, this American ingenuity that we always talk about. It's pretty impressive. You built a house out of sod. Here's another sod house. Now, these weren't great all year round. If it rained, you're kind of screwed. Tornadoes not going to protect you. You got really cold, you were cold. You got really hot, you were hot. But it was a roof over your head, I guess. The bugs were a problem, whatever else. Again, here's a worse sod house. Here's another sod house. Here's another sod house. So again, not the greatest, but again, it was living if you wanted to move out west. There wasn't very much water out west either, so that was a problem. It was very dry, the water. So that became somewhat of a problem. And so we had to adapt. So some of the things that we created to adapt, barbed wire. There's no wood to build fences, so we built barbed wire to make sure that we could designate what land was ours, and so those cowboys wouldn't bring the cows on our farms. So we used barbed wire. Also the steel plow. Steel plow is also important because it was hard to break through that really tough soil, so the steel plow was introduced to kind of do that. And Russian wheat. Russian wheat was significant because Midwestern temperatures were really bad, and if this wheat can survive Russian winters, I'm sure it can survive American winters. That's kind of the argument. Eventually, these small farms begin to merge, and you start seeing the rise of bonanza farms. So bonanza farms are these like factory farms, these super large farms. These are kind of ones we have today, like Kellogg's and whatever else. See the rise of factory farms. And prices will fall for farmers. And one of the biggest reasons why prices will fall are for really two reasons: overproduction and global competition. Farmers still aren't very educated at this time, and so the problem is that a farmer, if they farm, will try to grow as much as possible. I mean, that's just how you do it, right? You're going to grow as much as you can because you want to sell as much for your family. The problem is if every farmer grows as much as they can, they're going to grow too much, and then prices will fall. So overproduction resulted in falling prices, as did global competition. They have to compete with rice being grown in India and wheat being grown in China. And so now, facing global competition, American farmers are going to have to struggle with their own overproduction, which is probably the worst problem. Their biggest fault for struggling at this time is that they just didn't know what they were doing. They overproduced. And so a few groups emerge. The first is a group called the Grangers. The Grangers was a group of, the Granger movement was designed to help farmers. It was designed to educate farmers, about how not to overproduce, how to be wise about farming, irrigation tips. It was again about farming education. It was a social movement. But they also tried to fight back against railroads. They tried to fight against railroads because railroads, the biggest problem between railroads and farmers is that railroads overcharged farmers all the time because they could. They would say, "Oh, you want to ship your goods to New York? That would be $1,000. Well, I don't want to do that. I don't pay that much. Okay, we can ask the other railroad. Oh wait, there aren't any. So you can pay me $1,000, or you can pay me $1,200. Your choice." And so the railroads took advantage, and so you had the beginning of Granger laws. And the Granger laws were designed to regulate railroads. These are state laws designed to regulate railroads. So each state would pass their own Granger law to regulate railroads. Then you have the rise of the Farmers Alliance. This is really like more of a political movement. So the social movement was a Granger movement, and as the Granger movements became somewhat successful, they became the Farmers Alliance. And the Farmers Alliance was a political movement at the state level. They tried to gain more political power in the states. They tried to pass more pro-farmer laws in like Illinois, Ohio, whatever else, just to promote farmers' interests. Eventually, again, the belief is that farmers felt that they were holding up this almighty idea of capitalism, and they didn't want to be at the bottom anymore. They wanted to kind of flip all of this on its head. And so eventually the farmers create the Populist Party or the People's Party, and that's how we come back full circle. They promote the Populist Party, which again will promote people's interests. These are their demands. You don't have to know all of these, but they do want the direct election of senators, which means instead of Congress or the state governments getting to choose their senators, we get to choose our senators. So the people get to vote directly. And they also wanted to coin silver, which means they wanted more money in the U.S. economy. Because you can't just print money. It's going to cause inflation. So they said, why don't we introduce silver to the economy? That way we can have more money. Many people don't like that. So coinage of silver kind of becomes like the key thing for the Populist Party. They want silver because silver creates inflation. If there's inflation, prices go up, and farmers like it when prices go up. That's really what it comes down to. Farmers like when prices go up because then prices are good. The other way to look at it is that farmers owed all these loans, and when those prices go up, that means it's still cheap money, but the farmers can now use that cheap money to pay their banks with that cheaper money. So in any case, in the election of 1896, you have the bimetallism issue. There are people that are pro-gold, pro-silver, that kind of thing. William Jennings Bryan, who is a populist, he gives the famous Cross of Gold speech that says that gold is bad and that you shall not press upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns, you shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. So the Cross of Gold speech by William Jennings Bryan is an anti-gold speech, saying that gold is bad. That instead you should have gold and silver. He wants both. He's a bimetalist. He wants gold and silver because then we can print more money. If you have just gold, then the lower classes won't have any money. So having more gold and silver is good for the U.S. economy. In any case, there's all this stuff happening. The Populist Party is, they're afraid the Democratic Party will be swallowed up by the Populists. That doesn't happen. Blah, blah, blah. Things happen. There's an election. And then he loses. Now, there is an essay out there that argues that the Wizard of Oz is actually an allegory of the election of 1896. Here's how it goes. That yellow brick road actually represents gold, the gold standard that the Republicans wanted. Because if you actually read the book says that, oh, this yellow brick road looks good from afar, but when you really look at it, there are cracks and pieces missing. I don't know how far this road will go, suggesting that maybe gold is not so strong. That gold standard might actually be weak. Then you have the ruby red slippers. Now the ruby red slippers were not originally ruby red, they were actually silver. But when MGM first released The Wizard of Oz, they actually introduced a new technology called Technicolor. They want to show off that red. And so they put her in ruby red, but they're actually supposed to represent the silver standard, at which point in the book, Dorothy says, wow, these shoes are so comfortable and sturdy, I feel like these shoes will last and stay with me everywhere I go, arguing that maybe, just maybe, the silver shoes are supposed to represent the strength of the silver standard. Dorothy, you notice she has red lips, white blouse, blue skirt, blue dress. She represents the American people. She's the innocent one. She's the one who has to discover for herself how to move forward. The Cowardly Lion is supposed to represent William Jennings Bryan, the candidate who ran at this time, who's all talk but no bite. The Tin Man is supposed to represent the factory worker that had no heart and hated his job and constantly just felt like a robot all the time. The Scarecrow, stupid, no brain, is the farmer that clearly did not know what they were doing because they were missing a brain, not educated. And then the Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is actually two people. You have the face and you have the person behind the scenes. This is actually supposed to represent William McKinley, the candidate at the time, as the Wizard of Oz. And then the guy behind the scenes was Mark Hanna, the guy who was actually running the campaign at the time, actually pulling the strings. So that's Mark Hanna there. The Wicked Witch of the East was supposed to represent the banks. And again, they were crushed by a housing crisis, or at least a economic crisis. Wicked Witch of the West was supposed to represent the railroad monopolies, how they were evil. And unfortunately, the essay goes that the monkeys are supposed to represent Native Americans because they're strange and weird and different. In any case, William McKinley wins that election, and populism loses as a result. And that's the Gilded Age.
That's really cool about the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, so I mean,
I've never heard that.
it's likely that that's not what the book was written for, but it is a nice, it fits.
Well.
And so you can tell your kids that it was written that way because it's not going to change their lives one way or another.
Yeah.
But I like to tell them as this is what the book was written, and it's a wonderful allegory of the election of 1896. And it fits. Now, the movie doesn't fit because the movie was not really, it's based on the book, but loosely.
Yeah.
But it really does base it off the book, and so it actually is a nice allegory. There's an essay on it. If you look at The Wizard of Oz and the Gilded Age, or The Wizard of Oz and the Election of 1896, there's an essay by two Stanford students that actually kind of pull that all together. But yeah, let's see here. Next week we'll finish off U.S. history, and then we'll go from there. All right.